welcome to the Firebird Q&A with actor Tom Pryor and director Peter Rebane. I'd like to thank you both for joining us. I want to say to the both of you, I absolutely enjoyed the film. It's a lovely piece of work. You should be very proud of yourselves. And I think that you achieved a level of love and passion, not only in the on-screen characters, but in the look and the feel and the story of your film. And Peter, I'd like to start with you. Can you tell me, this story is based on a true story, so these characters really existed at some point in our history. Can you tell me what drove you to choose this particular story for your directorial debut?
Well, the story actually found me almost 10 years ago when a friend was approached by a Russian journalist at the Berlinale Film Festival, and I read it in my broken Russian at home alone over a weekend, and literally it just made me cry. It was so heart-touching, tragic, sad, amazing, and almost unbelievable that how could such a story have existed in the Soviet Air Force at the height of the Cold War in the 1970s. It was really, yeah, I just felt I had to turn it into a film.
Thank you for that. You find stories or things happen in your life when you least expect them to. And I imagine that that was a very rewarding experience, both for you and for Tom as the co-screenwriter, to be able to adapt that into a modern day film.
It was quite a challenge. I think, after 2 years of writing, and that's the first script that I ever wrote, so I had to learn really how to write a screenplay. We were introduced with Tom, and with the intention actually by a producer from Los Angeles of Tom playing the lead part. And we shot a couple of scenes as a sizzle reel proof of concept for our financiers. And then Tom started to make some suggestions.
No, I kind of began giving a little bit of feedback, like in places, and then sort of like made some suggestions initially around dialogues in the teasers that we shot, and then that kind of dug me a hole into doing a good 2 weeks worth of feedback, which we did, and Peter sort of kindly listened to my notes, and then that led to literally about 2.5 years worth of rewriting together.
Wow.
Yeah, and that kind of really the kind of main things that I kind of came to the script with was dialogues, like emotional truth, and then we both worked actively to kind of really sink the original story into the sort of sociological and political context of the time, because actually when you read the original book by Sergei, the love story is just so profound, but it didn't really give the context of how on earth was this possible. It almost kind of made it sound like it was like very idyllic and almost like a dream, and almost kind of too easy. And so a lot of the adaptation that we did actually was really about making that a priority, really, particularly like an entry to global audiences who wouldn't necessarily know what was going on at the time.
I hadn't watched the trailer before I saw the film, nor had I read your synopsis. So I went into the film completely cold, and I was really happy to see that the movie was set in the late 70s. And that's someone that also took me somewhat by surprise, because you don't expect an LGBTQ love story to be told in the late 70s. And then the surprise takes it even further that it's set in the middle of Russia, which dampens any feelings that anybody has for one another. And so I thought that it laid the groundwork for a very beautiful story. How did you, Tom, go about approaching the character, both from a writer and of Sergei, from a writer and from an actor? Because I would think that you take it from two different approaches.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the greatest gift an actor can ever have is really great material. And, you know, having the basis of such an amazing story, and then, you know, having the privilege, honestly, to write the story of how you're going to play. That has its challenges as well, because you're a bit like, sometimes you're a bit like, who the hell wrote this? Like, why do I have to do this? And then you're like, oh, great. Like, there's no one to blame but myself. When you're kind of crawling through mud for like a number of hours, or shooting in the sea, the cold Baltic Sea for 11 hours of the day. But yeah, the kind of process of writing and meeting Sergei really kind of like informed the experience. I actually quite consciously didn't read the original story for quite a while, actually, into our writing process. And then when it kind of came around to the time that we were actually going to go meet Sergei in Russia, I actually made the journey through the original book. And what was amazing actually was that I'd been kind of quite instinctive about wanting to put in some Shakespeare. And I was like, oh, that's probably just like my British background and my Royal Academy training and like Shakespeare and la 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 la. I mean, I love Shakespeare. And it was really pleasantly surprising to find actually that about, I'm not exactly sure the total number, but there's quite a significant number of the chapters of the book which actually start with a Shakespeare quote. And so this was very curious to kind of find that there was this actually not even a subculture, but a huge celebration actually for Shakespeare in the Soviet Union in the 1960s. And, you know, during, I think it was 1963, there was something like 300 different productions of Shakespeare going on in the Soviet Union at one time. And so this was something that I had kind of brought again to the writing. But it basically is like a really great way of doing amazing actors preparation. You know, we got to meet so many people, meeting the real Sergei, but then also meeting a lot of other people who served in the Soviet army during this time, and sort of finding out the nuances by, as a conscript, as you move up every sort of 6 months in your conscription, you kind of basically get raised a level in status. And so the people who come in at entry level were just treated like absolute scum, and are just treated like so poorly. And basically you're effectively beaten up for 6 months. And then you kind of, as you raise to the kind of the levels through the army, you kind of become like sort of more respected and more left alone and more kind of doing that to other people. And that's actually why when you see in the film, Sergei actually is not the one being shouted at and being thrown on the floor, because actually he's like in his final months, and that's kind of just really months before graduation. And we decided to also make him very close to the colonel of the Air Force Base in his professional job. But it really just like helped inform me so much of the acting. And then honestly, like sometimes I would sit down into a scene and like it kind of almost came through me. Like when I don't want to do any spoilers because I don't know if people are watching this before or after, but
I think after, so I think
okay.
You're okay to give spoilers.
Well, the moment actually where Sergei reads the letter that Roman left, that he's going to Afghanistan, I to a degree became so attached to the material that actually, I mean, I recall literally we were in the theater and the camera was set up and Peter was like, okay, let's go. And I literally just like sat into the scene and just the whole thing kind of came through me. I didn't actually do anything, which was kind of amazing actually, like to get to that point of preparation and also that point of letting go, that the kind of performance really came through. And so hopefully it appears on the screen too.
For me, it definitely did. And it's interesting that you mentioned letting it go, because I think to some degree at the beginning of the film, your character wants to let go, but is so encumbered by not only the rules and the regulations, but society at that time in general. You couldn't let go. And what I find interesting is that as a parallel, the film opens with the scene of a dream of drowning. At least that's what I took away from it, and it's explained in the middle of the movie. But there's something profound in opening a film about drowning and how you feel, the visually it's internalized for the audience, and it's connected at the end with that letter. And Peter, to your credit, it's a brilliant piece of direction, because it's not easy, from my experience, it's not easy to balance the two together. So first of all, thank you. And second of all, was that an intentional connection, or was it something deeper than that?
It was definitely intentional, and we actually, I think one of the toughest things in post-production in editing was when we were sitting with Tom and our editor and discussing how much of the dream, because we had probably about 20 different versions of where we used and where we reminded, and the current version of the film is where we ended up on, because it's really easy to overdo it, and it's also really easy to leave it, like to underdo it, so that people don't make the connections, just feel this jarring images that why is it here. And it's amazing how you make the film really, in that sense, 3 times. That since the beginning, it was this feeling that we want to give this kind of poetic, but at the same time anxious scene of the youth, or really of Sergei's memory of his youth and of his loss of his best friend. But then shooting it was a challenge, because we had to actually, you can't really do that with VFX, and we didn't really have a budget for VFX. So we actually found this deep diving rescue training center, which had this huge 5-meter depth pool, and had divers cover it with black plastic so it would be dark. And literally, it's done physically. It's very, very. I mean, we had a harness around one of those young boys, and they're both underwater swimmers. We actually found, they had to obviously look, one of them had to look like young Sergei, and had to be absolutely comfortable spending, minutes underwater. And we had a mechanical device, like a cable, fastly pulling him towards the bottom of the tank, with his parents, looking up. It was pretty, let's say, challenging to get those shots to work, and then to actually figure out how much of it to put into the film.
I can imagine. It was just it's so poetic. I remember many beautiful things about your film, but that was one of the things that stood out for me, because it tells so much in such a very short span of time. The other aspect that I appreciated was the use of the Firebird opera, or ballet, excuse me, and the music. And Tom, I noticed in the credits that you were also credited with music supervision or selection, if I remember correctly. And I imagine that that's also a part of your theatrical background, not just as an actor, but stage acting as well. How did you go about choosing the particular selections for the film? And what type of, I know it's to each scene, but what type of emotional undercurrent were you looking to achieve with the selections that you ultimately chose?
Well, firstly, actually, I can't take credit for the inclusion of Firebird, only because that was actually in the script before I came to it. Mm-hmm. So I kind of like had my say on actually whether, how appropriate it was or not, and sort of like which sort of we spoke kind of quite extensively about, which bits like would kind of work for dipping into for the movie. But like really, when it comes to musical direction and sort of like the musical score, we were we found such an amazing music composer, Christoph. And Peter and I worked with him in Poland, in Warsaw at the beginning of 2020, in his apartment for like a week. And we basically just kind of like created the music between the three of us. But like, it kind of really was actually through this process of making this film that it dawned on me just how important music is to me, and actually how much music affects me and in films. And I just think that it's almost like this secret weapon which people don't necessarily fully understand actually how much it influences your audience. And I think that what Christoph managed to do and managed to take my notes and Peter's notes about when creating the musical score was amazing. And it kind of, again, sort of like ended up finding me in a very curious way, because I would never set out to be the musical, doing the kind of like this sort of consulting on the music. But we were actually in the post-production with Tomba, our amazing editor, and Peter, and Tomba said like, oh, I just can't find a piece of like temp score for like this particular section. Like, and I was like, oh, well, I'll just go have a listen. And I just sort of basically would wander around, like literally feeling music, and then just kind of bringing pieces back when they were carrying on with the edit as well. And would sort of literally just go like, well, what about this? And he'd be like, what the hell? Like, this is like really good. He was like, okay, now go find another piece. And I was just like, oh God. And then so it kind of basically began like that. And it just sort of really happened very organically. And there was one particular section in the old town. It's basically when Zverev has just like said to Sergei, like, I'm watching you, after the joke scene, and how that transits into the Tallinn old town visit. And it was a one particularly difficult area to find temp score for. And so like I then was just like wandering around near my apartment in London and just like listening to two things. And I was like, look, like I came back and I was like, look, we have actually to have two pieces here, because it doesn't work. One piece of music doesn't make that transition. And so we literally took like two different pieces of music and basically sewed them together. And that's actually one of the only places actually in the final score where we said to Christopher, I was like, look, can you actually do it kind of like the temp score? And that's quite unusual, because, normally you'll put in temp and then you let the music composer just kind of do their magic. And like my God, like he did magic like in so many different places. But this was like one place where we had managed to find like a rhythm and a pace and a change, which actually seemed to work so strongly. That actually we said that was one area where if it could be kind of more inspired by the temp score, it was. So I mean, I could talk about the music of the film for ages, but that's just kind of like one kind of particular moment which sticks out for me, and kind of creatively being involved in this film is it like kind of like so much more than the acting. Is it's kind of almost funny that I kind of look at it now and go like, the acting is almost like the smallest part that I've done in this film production now. But it's been a total joy to be able to kind of get, have that level of trust to be able to do that as well.
Absolutely. Peter, one of the things that I noticed was the film's cinematography. And although I'm not a photographer, I'm interested in the study of photography, and that was one of the aspects that caught my attention of how, Tom, you portray Sergei, but you managed to film several scenes as if they were shot through the lens of the camera, or the viewfinder of the camera, so that you truly get the Sergei's point of view of as he's shooting his subjects. And I thought that was a beautiful way of communicating just how much love he had for, forgive me, I'm forgetting the other character's name, for the other character. And it was just such a, there are beautiful and profound moments, but the flip side of that is that he has to capture other subjects within his frame. And so you notice that when that happens, the main eye candy in his frame is sharply in focus, and the other subjects are softer and out of frame. And there were several shots throughout the film where you emulate that in outside of the viewfinder, camera viewfinder. One of the most poignant moments is on the wedding night when they're both in the courtyard outside the wedding hall, and the way you stage the shot, your focus puller does not intentionally, I'm looking for the right term, but Tom, you continue to be soft in the foreground, and the other actor is in the background, very clearly in focus. And then there's that moment in dialogue where it suddenly shifts, and Tom, you become much more clear, and the fellow actor is in the background soft. And the way you stage that shot, it's a long-winded question, but the way you stage the shot, you can tell that they are not going to be alone. You definitely foreshadow in a very effective way, both in the way that the shot is composed and the way that you move the camera and the focus. I imagine that you storyboarded all of those elements. Tom, you probably had some input into those shots, but can you tell me a little bit more about what your preparation process was as far as lining up your shots?
Thank you for that amazing analysis. I think it's the most in-depth analysis that any interviewer has done. Well, first of all, we had an amazing DOP, Mait, who is an old school DOP in Estonia. He studied in the 80s at the Moscow Cinematography Institute under Tarkovsky's DOP, Yusov as his teacher. So for me personally, the biggest teacher in making this film. I mean, it's my first feature and he has made many. So it was amazing to work together with him, and I've worked with him for 10 years on pretty much all of my projects except one music video. But everything else, documentaries, music videos, we've always worked together. And it's you're absolutely right. It's not coincidental that the framing, but also the focus pulling is an important part of the whole staging, because you do direct the attention. And if you noticed in the beginning of that same scene, the very first shot when Roman steps in, focus is also intentionally left soft on Sergei when he speaks at first, and kind of to really create this further emotion. So it's a lot of discussions. I mean, we visited together with Mait, the DOP, the sets, I think the locations about at least 3 times. And we would sit there and we would discuss how we do things, and we would draw camera plans and kind of do the very traditional planning, which then in some cases we threw away on the day when we did a rehearsal and we saw something better, or when the actors came up with suggestions, we were like, oh, like this is cool, or this is actually important here. And in other cases, it was very useful, especially when it's a complex scene, because you don't have to start spending time on the set so much. You already both know what is going on, and you can focus on lighting and you can focus on performances instead of technical aspects of how do we frame and how do we pull and how do we move here. What I really loved about working with Mait is I think which is the biggest change or biggest, let's say, difference with younger DOPs is that every camera move and every decision has to be motivated by story. And that's what I really learned from him, that whether it's focus pulling, whether it's any move of the camera, every little detail, it's only justified if it really adds to the storytelling. And the same with like the overall visual picture. At first, I was like a bit resistant of shooting it in 185 instead of widescreen. Now I totally get it. It was, again, our DOP's insistence, because that was the format of the day. And we also went with color grading into this 1980s Soviet film look, with its peculiar tones of greens and reds. So there's a lot of thought and huge amount of team effort behind the scenes, which I think the audience rarely sees or understands really. And for me personally, as a first-time director, also there was so much to learn of how the different parts of the team really create this final visual result.
Thank you for that. It's the other aspect of your film filming, the look of the film. I think the 1:8:5 choice, and by that I'm referring to the aspect ratio. The 1:8:5 aspect ratio really creates an intimacy throughout the film that you don't expect, because you start out in a very wartime, Cold War time feeling and action and poise, and then you slowly transition into that actor's world, if you will, pardon the pun, but the freedom that acting allowed for towards the latter half of the movie. But in between, there are the lovemaking scenes and the encounters on the rocks, and the way that those scenes are framed. And Tom, you had mentioned long days shoots in ice cold water. That doesn't come across on the screen. You both looked very comfortable in your own skin. The camera really captures the color grading, to Peter's point, really captures the essence of skin tone and flesh, and you don't lose that within your lovemaking scenes, and it felt very natural. I wanted to hug you both as I was watching those scenes, because there's a level of passion, but there's also a level of honesty between the two of you. You are each other's world. Can you talk, Tom, just a little bit more about what the experience was in making those particular scenes? Did you have fun doing them? I know that's an odd question. And did you struggle with anything in terms of being able to maintain the essence of telling the story too?
Either you're going to say, do you struggle maintaining something else through the scene in cold water? And yeah, that's obviously a challenge. I mean, thank you for such a sort of dynamic question. The shooting in the water was actually our first day of principal photography. And so that day, I personally spent about 11 hours in the sea. And, it was basically like the friends getting to know each other for the first time, at the opening of the film. And then, of course, then the intimate scene, and then the little bit when they're also running out and the military guards come and get Volodya, or try and sort of threaten Volodya from the beach. And yeah, there's nothing quite like getting thrown in the deep end, like literally with doing an intimate scene on the first day of shoot. We had deliberately scheduled rehearsals for a couple of weeks before we even started shooting, simply to get the dynamic between all of us, actually, so Louisa and Volodya's and Sergei's friendship, and then obviously the closeness with Sergei and Roman. And yeah, the first day broke the ice literally with the costume department ladling hot water all over my body and down my pants and stuff, like, so that I was sort of still functional. And the crew actually built us a sauna tent on the beach, which was actually like a real gift, because I think shooting in England, nobody would have come up with that. They would have been like, oh, suck it up, it's cold, get over it. And like, there's nothing that's going to like set somebody to get a bit sick at the beginning of a shoot than a shoot like that, with that many hours in cold water. But since then, I've also become fascinated by Wim Hof, and so if I'd actually known that work before, then it might have been a bit more useful. But But yeah, so actually, shooting the intimate scenes in the film, we made quite a clear choice to always make them character driven, and also to make it about love, not about mechanics, or not about a kind of particular sequence of physical actions which one would expect to happen in a certain way, or one would expect to have certain positions around, or whatever.
Right.
And so, when we were writing the film as well, I was like, I really want to I was like, I love this quote which Robert Mapplethorpe says, that I saw on an exhibition many years ago. I didn't actually know him as a photographer before that. And he says, I want to see something I've never seen before. Mm-hmm. And I had not seen a intimate scene in such a way done in the sea or done in water. And, the rock where they do it becomes this sort of, metaphorical place for the friends, for the intimacy, and also it being frozen at the end. And so yeah, we kind of really wanted to make the intimate scenes really about this sort of merging of souls coming together, as opposed to any kind of like physical associations which actually could alienate certain audiences. And we wanted to make the film about love. And so it's been kind of really amazing to hear that quite a lot of people who've seen the film, who maybe aren't necessarily part of the LGBTQIA plus community, have really responded to the intimate scenes and said that they found them very erotic. They haven't found them alienating, and that really was something that we deliberately tried to do. And I guess like also, yeah, that just to answer the last part of your question as well, with challenges, I think actually like the main thing actually was that everybody had always told me that like shooting sex scenes is like the most unsexy, awkward thing ever. And that you'll be lucky if you get turned on or whatever it might be. And I have to say that thanks to like how our set was handled, and also, the professionalism of Oleg and I together, and discussing how we were going to shoot like the main sort of sex scene in the film as well, after Roman almost dies and Sergei saves him. Again, we kind of wanted to make it really about details and exploration of the physical form, and again, like make it about love. And I think that, thanks to everybody's kind of like courage and also professionalism, we managed to, I think, produce something which looks pretty believable. Yes. Some people, like a lot of people have said actually, that the chemistry between Oleg and I is pretty effective. And I'm like so pleased actually of how it came out on the screen, particularly actually as Oleg and I couldn't communicate that much, because his first language is Ukrainian and then Russian. And then obviously my first language is English. And so his level of English was actually very small. And my level of Russian is pretty much non-existent, because we decided to not shoot in Russian in the end. And I mean, that's a whole other conversation. But yeah, so we actually couldn't get to know each other that well on a knowledge, conversational closeness like basis. It ended up being much more about how we communicated with each other on a physiological, emotional level. And it kind of seems to work quite well, because you couldn't write the dialogue which happens between men trying to scale the situation during that time, as we discovered as the writers, because there was no language to describe this at the time. Like it's an illegal act, and you can't start going, oh, what's your preference, or how do you like it, or whatever it might be. Like none of this exists. So I think in the long run, it's ended up actually being a surprising gift to the film, rather than a hindrance, being like, oh, I didn't get to know him that well.
You feel the natural tensions between two souls who are discovering each other through that effort, and it translates. Please pardon the pun. It translates very well on the screen and in your performances. And Peter, the ability to be able to capture that, I think, is a real gift. And Tom, to you as a performer, it's also a real gift. You've given the world something that I think we don't see very much of in LGBTQ cinema. And for me, I'm very appreciative of seeing that, because, as I said, it's so very natural. So thank you to the both of you for that. I'm stammering here, but I'm also very appreciative, because my mind is literally blown with how beautiful and poignant those moments are. They really touched me in a very unique way. So thank you for that. Something else I wanted to touch on was costuming, because it's in the late 70s, early 80s. I know that the movie transitions through several years. And one of the things that I noticed in when they are off duty is that Tom, your character, Sergei, wears blue an awful lot. And I don't know if that was an intentional choice, whether it's a blue shirt of some sort or a blue jacket. And it slowly transitions. I think one of my favorite scenes is the New Year's Eve celebration in the flat, where you are consciously wearing if I remember correctly, a blue sport coat with a red shirt. And Louisa is wearing a red dress. And I believe that Roman is wearing a blue shirt of some sort. And so it very clearly denotes the division between all of the characters in terms of a love life. What informed the decision to go with that particular palette, or was it something that occurred naturally through the course of the production?
That's a really good question. But yeah, I'll let Peter answer first, and I can chip in a little bit about that.
Yeah, it was definitely a conscious decision in terms of colors. As you've noticed, there were basically three primary colors that we used in the film, which were this Russian Soviet red, this kind of Air Force blue, and the golden yellow, and they are, they are also the primary colors in the set design of Firebird. And then when we look at the characters, each of them have colors which change during the course of the film. As you well noticed, Sergei starts out on the green spectrum and ends up on blue, whereas blue is really originally Roman's color from the first shot, and he ends up more on the kind of gray-black scale. So it's all to really support the storytelling and give this additional layer of, I would say, subconscious perception, and colors, like music, like a lot of the elements of the film, always have a strong influence on how we perceive the world and the characters. And there's some big one of these amazing examples, which actually our DOP asked us to watch before, was Paris, Texas by Wim Wenders, and the use of color there. Tom can add, I think, from his perspective. So
yeah, I think like when it came to costuming, I think we were really blessed with a very, very competent team. Like I think actually the majority of our costumers' input was all like, they all lived in that era as well, so they kind of knew what was relevant, what was appropriate. And then also because we'd made the decision to shoot the film really through the eyes of Sergei, through the sort of eyes of the 20-year-old boy looking at the Soviet Union, we decided to make the colors, for the most part, like brighter, and the costumes fit better than they did, because when you kind of look behind the Iron Curtain, it was a bit of a shambles how everything was kind of thrown together at times. But at the same time, when you look back, you're kind of looking at something, you kind of pulling out those colors, like I ended up having quite a lot of actual choice and input into what Sergei would have worn, and particularly on that journey through the film, because, you know, earlier on he's in the military uniform and there's not really a lot to be said about that. And when you were in the conscription, you had to really adhere to the specific nuances of the uniform, and they had to be sort of like buttoned done all the way up to the top when you or entry level, for example. But then as you get further down, again, these are like the little intricacies, but like you see Sergei most of the time he'll have a button like a little bit open here, and that's because, again, he's like at this graduating period where you can kind of like get away with a few more things and wear things a little bit looser or a little bit more personal. That was kind of like your only way of personalizing the same uniform that you had. But yeah, then sort of like through his journey, he ends up sort of wearing like brighter colors and kind of like becomes like more into this sort of like freer environment that kind of comes about through going to drama school. And it's really, you know, as a result of Sergei meeting Roman, the unlocking kind of like happens, right? Roman is kind of like the unlocker of Sergei to kind of really go out and go and achieve his dreams, and also to sort of wear his heart on his sleeve in a way that, you know, Roman could never do. So yeah, that's the kind of journey really for costume. But it was really amazing, again, to actually have like input into that, to kind of like feel out, having been with Sergei and the material for so long, kind of what he would wear and what kind of like felt right, and what was just like, oh no, like this doesn't feel, you know, it was, we said Roman was very much like grays and blacks and whites towards the end of the film, whereas Sergei is kind of pulling out the colors.
Absolutely. I want to thank you both very much for your time. It's been a genuine pleasure to speak with you about your film. Firebirds will be playing as part of the Desperado LGBTQ Film Festival here. And both to both of you, brilliant work. I can't wait to see what you both do next. And as I said, I'm forever appreciative of your film.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. And really, really wish we could be there with you, but we hope to make it one day also to the festival.
Absolutely. Thanks for being part of our program. I appreciate it. I'm the festival programmer, by the way. It was great to watch the film and share it with our team and bring it to Phoenix.
Forgive me for not introducing Alan. This is Alan East, the film festival programmer. He's an admirer of the film and wanted to take a few minutes to be a part of this conversation. And I'm glad that we could all get together this morning.
Yeah, thank you so much for such detailed and analytical questions, as well as really amazing to have eyes that can see the thing that we hoped that people would see.
Yeah, Ben is definitely an expert at that. Absolutely. He's got an eye for that.
But Alan, how is the situation actually with the, let's say, people going to cinemas? Like, we've seen so many different experiences at different festivals. That how is the situation over there? Are people returning to cinemas, or are you more virtual this year out of interest?
Ben, go ahead.
So for the festival in general, it's virtual. I've noticed that a lot of festivals are still going virtual despite the gradual fall off of the Delta variant. Audiences are starting to return to cinemas for general theatrical releases. So I think it's, pardon the expression, 10 half, 1 dozen the other. Depending on the audience's desire to be in a theater or watch at home. So for your film, I think we have you'll get, it'll be interesting to see how much exposure the film gets, because it is virtual, but I think it has the opportunity to attract a lot more eyes, because we're not just limited to an auditorium here in Arizona. Everybody around the globe or within the United States can actually see your film. And this is an opportunity to get it out to as many people. And, as soon as we're done here, I'm going to get on social media and spread the word, because your film deserves it. I've got the feels, pardon the expression, because of how proud I am of the film and how thrilling it is. It's a visceral experience.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Absolutely. Thank you again both for your time today. I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to audience reaction and ongoing discussions, and good luck with the rest of the circuit. I know you guys have been busy. I can't thank you enough for your time today.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks very much.
We really appreciate it.